You have to admit the political climate feels tense right now. Emotions are running high after the Charlie Kirk assassination, and it raises a tricky question for your workplace. What happens when politics enters the workplace? In this episode, I'm tackling when politics and work collide and answering a critical question that's coming up more and more every day. Can employees talk about politics at work? And can they actually post about it online? Well, if this resonates with you, then guess what? Stay tuned because this episode is just for you. Hi everyone, welcome back to Lawlands. My name is Sanam and thank you so much for tuning in to the Employment Law Done Right podcast. Welcome everyone. We are back again with another episode. I actually had one ready to go that I had recorded, and then after everything that ensued last week, I thought we need to talk about this because it is becoming more and more prevalent in workplaces, and politics isn't just happening in Parliament. It's at lunchrooms, it's in Zoom calls when you go out with the workmates. I remember when I worked in private practice, it would come up all the time, when you're hanging around with a bunch of lawyers. For me personally, I don't like to dabble in the conversation and get involved, but I do love watching debates and seeing how everything goes down and just that going back and forth. Because when we're looking at people coming into work now, they're really bringing their whole selves to work, right? You're talking about opinions that they have through to what they think about Jacinda or Luxon or even Trump. And we could see it even more during the Trump and Kamala election period. There were so many people in New Zealand that were tuning in. So it's really interesting because we're not just talking about US politics anymore. The way that our social media is set up and just the way that we have connection across the globe. With the Charlie Kirk murder last week, there was a huge uproar and there's been strong opinions from both sides, the left and the right. Even though we're so far away from the United States, we're crossing this massive ocean to get to us. I'm sure that your feeds were flooded with the Charlie Kirk assassination. Look, I don't get into politics on this podcast, and I usually give you both sides to what's been happening. But what I will say about this whole situation with Charlie Kirk is that Charlie's murder was shocking. And I can only imagine what this is going to be like for the world moving forward. And I know that US politics may seem really far away, but the reality is that it is cropping up more and more. And I've definitely been seeing my fair share of employers reaching out where there are questions around, are we allowed to say anything about this particular social media post? So it is happening. It is cropping up. And now I want you to have all the tools in your toolbox ready to go so that you know exactly what you can and cannot do and what's acceptable and not acceptable. So how does that really apply to New Zealand? We'll definitely get into that. Before we do, you know what time it is. It's time for me to do my shameless little plug. If you've been following the podcast, then thank you so much for following along. I hope you are enjoying these episodes, but I know that there is a whole bunch of you out there that is not following. I'm looking at you. Yes, you can see my episodes are sporadic. I'm trying to get back onto a schedule. I've been saying it for months now, but it's fine. We will get there in the end, and when it's all smooth sailing, we're going to look back and go, remember when Sanam just couldn't get her act together? Well, she's doing okay now. Guys, I also have a newsletter as well, and I am really excited to say that I am going to be launching a mini course soon. It's something that's going to give you practical information about how to actually tackle an area of termination from start to finish. So if you're interested in that, then please make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter, and I will give you more information in the coming days. So keep that in mind. But now let's get back into it. Let's talk about the legalities of politics in the workplace, what you can and can't do as an employer. So first things first, I just want to say you cannot ban political conversations in the workplace. It cannot be a blanket ban that is done. There is no law in place to allow that. And that is because there are certain guardrails legally in place that kind of sets the parameters around what can and can't be discussed, how an employee can be treated or not treated if they are discussing their political opinions. And I'll explain what that means. So firstly, we have no law that says, no, you can't talk about politics at work. And that means that we have to turn to other pieces of legislation to see where the actual line is drawn. So the first thing is the Employment Relations Act. Now, under that, there is protections in place for things like unjustified disadvantage or dismissal. And those protections also relate to political views. Unless it impacts the role in particular, or there's some bearing on your role where you shouldn't be expressing political opinions and things like that, there is a protection in place that says that if you treat an employee differently to others, treat them less than others in the workplace because of their political opinion, then an employee is able to raise a personal grievance for unjustified disadvantage. If you terminate them because of their political views or the opinions that they hold, then that would be unjustified dismissal. So there are grounds there. The next layer to that is that you've got the Human Rights Act, and this is all about political opinion being a prohibited ground of discrimination, meaning that if you've got a political opinion in the workplace and the employer turns around and treats you unfairly at work in a way that is unreasonably disadvantaging you because of what you believe in, then the employee has grounds for a discrimination claim under the Human Rights Commission. A lot more serious. Human Rights Commission, they fork out a lot of cash when it comes to compensation. So it's not the ideal place to be breaching. Now, health and safety at work, what you have in terms of your responsibility as a person conducting a business or undertaking, is what we call PCBU under the health and safety legislation. You as an employer have a duty to prevent bullying, to prevent harassment and toxic conflicts. As part of those obligations, you have to make sure that employees are not treated unfairly or treated in a bullying manner or harassed because of their political views. But to that as well, you've also got the Bill of Rights, completely separate from any employment-related things. There is this protection when it comes to freedom of expression, so that you are able to express your beliefs and what you believe in. But we'll get into it a bit later, but there are parameters in place for public sector employees, which I found very interesting. And I thought, wow, we really need to discuss this in this episode. We'll get into all of that. But as you can see, there are laws in place, not directly, but there are parameters in place. And that means that employees, to a certain extent, can talk about political things at work, right? That's what we're kind of getting from the legislation. So let's set the scene and set the scenario. What we actually saw, and I believe this was in a Gallup survey. I will link it down below in the show notes in the description, so make sure you check it out. But there was a survey that was conducted. It was conducted in US soil and other companies that are outside of New Zealand, but I believe that the sentiment is quite similar. And the survey showed that 1 in 10 workers feel uncomfortable when politics comes up. I know I used to. I still do. If people bring up politics, I usually just ask for their opinion. And without me getting too far into it, I believe that it's because I don't hold a very similar opinion to most people that I interact with, but I just don't want to get into that conversation. So it's a lot easier to avoid. And it's unfortunate because I've read lots of articles out there that say, oh, it's great talking about politics at work can build connection. It can make engagement better and increase voter turnout and all these positive things. But then the cons to it is that you can feel quite excluded. It can cause tensions in the workplace. There could even be complaints coming in about a particular employee. So it's about balancing that, right? Proceed with caution and see what you want your workplace to really be about. But today we'll get into what the legalities are. You've heard about the legislation. Now let's talk about what an employer's actual responsibility is. We know that from the legislation and from those guardrails that you've got, you have a balance that you've got to do. You're balancing your freedom of expression, the ability to be able to say things and to freely express yourself as part of the Bill of Rights in New Zealand. And then you've got the other side of it, which is making sure that you create a safe and healthy workplace under the health and safety legislation, and also tying in discrimination-related legislation like the Human Rights Act. Few things at play here that you're really trying to balance as an employer. I never said that this was easy, okay? I never said that I'm making employment law easy for you. I said that I'm trying to simplify it. So how do I balance that? How do I let you say what you want, but then not offend everyone in the workplace? And then that becomes a health and safety issue. So how do I do this? Some examples of how this can crop up, just so that I can set the scene and what we've seen in the past, is an employee maybe posting something related to politics on their social media page, and it could be their own page, their own private personal page. Also, an employee claiming harassment due to their political views. Maybe people are treating them them a bit differently. So then you've got a manager maybe showing bias based on politics. So one employee gets less tasks. Maybe they're both on one particular side of the debate. And then you've got maybe a heated debate, which starts spilling into more bullying. Now you're targeting the person for the way that they look. You can see where this can get out of control. And I've personally dealt with a few things here and there. I prefer to just have a conversation with people. A lot of times we're just coming from two different sides of an aisle and we're trying to communicate and meet somewhere in the middle. And sometimes you don't meet in the middle, and that's okay. That's what it's like to have opinions. I'm pretty sure a lot of us share the same sentiment. I believe personally that having heavy-handed bans is going to backfire. If you're going to sit there and say no political conversation, none of this in the workplace, it's going to backfire because employees are going to want to talk about it. So what can you do as an employer? Employers need to understand that employees don't just have an unfettered freedom of expression. When it clashes with the employer's interests, reputation, or professional standards, it becomes a problem. And that's where your threshold is as an employer. It's when these conversations in the workplace can impact the employer's interests, their reputation, the standards that they have in the workplace, and doesn't breach any policies that are within reason. This even extends to posts that employees put out in a private capacity. So on their social media, it can still be something where you terminate an employee, especially when it impacts the trust and confidence in the employment relationship. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, there was a case that came up in 2023, which was a really good case. It hits every nail on the head that you need to have a look at as an employer when you're dealing with this kind of scenario. So this particular case was about a nurse that had been terminated by Te Whatu Ora. And as we know, they are the body that kind of runs the nurses across New Zealand. And with this nurse being dismissed, she was actually terminated because of her views on anti-vaccination and anti-LGBTQ rights. And you had this particular nurse posting things where she had a very small amount of friends on Facebook. It was only 86 friends. And that was one of the arguments that came up as well, is that we don't actually have a lot of people on the Facebook page here. Is it really that bad what I've said? It was interesting because as the case went through and we looked at every aspect of employment law, those guardrails, as well as looking at the Bill of Rights, it was interesting to see where this landed. So these were some of the themes that came up. First thing is, does this actually relate to your employment if your post is made on a private page and it's a private post outside of work? It has nothing to do with your job. And the question was, can it actually be grounds for discipline? And the answer is yes. Even if you've got somebody posting privately on their private page, if it is affecting the employment relationship, if it affects the perception of the employer, their reputation, the fact that they have a particular standard in place, then that can be a huge issue. Now, the other side to that as well is bringing the employer into disrepute, right? The angle that was taken here is because this was anti-vaccination, the posts clashed with the employer's values or its role in the public. The fact that it is about vaccination and inclusivity. And so that could actually damage the reputation of the employer. And that's what the link is. They need to be impartial, and the interests that she was presenting and the political opinions were starkly different to what the association and the board and what they put out in terms of vaccinations, right? So that's where you can see that the dismissal is considered potentially justifiable here. And the last few things that really landed this case, and this was actually in favor of the employer, was the professional obligations. As a nurse, this particular employee was held to the Nursing Council's Code of Conduct. And what the employment court said here was that even though you've got a situation where the nurse's conduct is private and in accordance with what they believe, at the end of the day, it's a regulated profession that she's in, and they have higher standards. And social media conduct that undermines those particular standards, which is what I mentioned to you before, like those employment standards that you have, or those standards by Te Whatu Ora, that means that there is an undermining of trust and it breaches the confidence that the employer has in the employee. And that's where this can also hang as well. So you see, it's got many layers to it, many prongs. It's not just don't talk about politics at work. It's how does it really impact the employer and the situation that you're in? And the last couple of things was around privacy and the fact that there was these 86 Facebook friends. Look, that would probably be my first go-to argument if anything came up, is I've only got like 10 friends. What difference does it make? But even though her posts were visible to only 86 people, it was considered wide enough to not truly be private, because you've got colleagues that were among her audiences that made the link to the employment relationship and the fact that this related to the employment relationship even stronger. If you've got colleagues in the mix, if there's any indication that you represent the employer in any capacity, you can see where this can start working against you as an employee. Have a strong policy. If you really want to contain these conversations, make sure that it's listed in your bullying and harassment policy, any discrimination related policies. Make sure you've set up your parameters. And what Te Whatu Ora did in this case was that they had a code of conduct and a social media policy that clearly set out expectations and consequences. Because the employee was on notice of these rules, the dismissal was found to be justified. So because the employee was fully aware that there were social media expectations on what can and cannot be posted, same thing goes with code of conduct, how you need to behave. Because of all of these things, the dismissal was found to be justified. And the last thing that I wanted to cover off was the Bill of Rights, because the argument could always be made. Remember that there's a freedom of expression that's happening here. That's the point of the Bill of Rights. But this is when the employment court said, no. The Bill of Rights doesn't apply to private employment relationships. But even if it did, they went so far as to say, even if it did, free expression is not absolute in New Zealand. And this is where US politics significantly differs from New Zealand politics, is that the freedom of expression is not absolute. Employers can actually limit when the comments conflict with their interests, their reputation, or legal duties. When we're looking at more and more workplaces saying, look, we don't want to participate in anything, we don't want to participate in anything related to politics, anything related to pop culture, any of that kind of stuff, we just want it to be contained, then it's about making sure your policies are really clear around that. But again, it's not stifling the voice to the point where there's a blanket ban, but it's setting those parameters that what you're saying as an employee on social media, in the workplace, can't conflict with interests, reputation, or those standards and those duties in the workplace. And one of the interesting sectors that I know I mentioned earlier was around the public sector. Public sector roles, they actually have political neutrality obligations. So you actually have to be neutral as a public sector employee. And I did a bit of searching and I found actually the public sector guidelines that they've got in place. When you're a public sector employee, we're talking about people that are working for IRD, MSD. It's very interesting because yes, it says that those particular employees need to be neutral in their official capacity. And State Services Commission guidance says that employees can join parties, they can stand for office, they can express views in a personal capacity, but they must not compromise neutrality at work. And social media posts, the reality is that those can blur the lines, right? What's a personal account could appear to be linked to an employer. And this is what I was getting more and more questions around. I've had this question crop up a few times, whether an employee that's posting about something political on their personal page, whether that's okay or not. Well, now we know that if there's colleagues in the mix, that could be a potential problem. But more so than that, an issue is, what if they talk about the employer a lot on their social media? Like all positive things, the employer is great, this is what we're doing, this is another initiative, all that stuff, and then bam, they've got something in there that's super political, just a random post, or we're raising money for this. What happens then? Again, that is where we go back to what parameters have you put in place, and do you have a good policy in place? So it's about making sure that this is not done in a way that brings the employer into disrepute, brings the values and standards of the workplace down, and doesn't breach any policies that are within reason. The courts and the Employment Relations Authority have clearly backed this all up. Don't gag the conversation. Don't say to an employee, no, you cannot discuss this, you cannot talk about this, but you can guide it. Set ground rules. Make sure that it's about participation in those conversations being voluntary. There's no discrimination. There's no harassment. Make sure that people respect the differences between their opinions and their ideas, because talking is important as well. But to that effect, have very clear policies in your workplace. Your social media policy today more than ever is important, because employees will be posting things, whether it's about politics or something else. Look how cool it is doing a donut outside on the streets and they're in the company car. there's just so many things that can be put online now. So it is important to have a social media policy, but more so than that, it is important for you to have policies on respectful behavior, on what is okay and not okay. Keep them within reason, lead by example, and make sure that the leaders are modeling this behavior. Do not silence or punish people because of them engaging in these conversations, but make sure that it is a place where people are going to be respectful to one another and that they are not pushing this into a point where it's creating a health and safety risk. In a world where we're discussing politics and it's getting sharper and we're seeing violence coming out of it, workplaces really need to be a safe place for people. And it's about making sure that you are setting those parameters and also understanding what you want to do as a business owner as well. That is it for me, everyone. I hope that this was useful. Like I said, make sure that you follow the podcast. And if you're interested in those courses that I'm going to be releasing, please make sure that you subscribe to the newsletter. Jump on, click on that link. It takes 2 seconds. It's free. The newsletter is jam-packed with information, even if you don't want to end up doing the course. I've got an optional box in there that asks you how we can tailor Lawlands to you. And if you're more interested in the courses, then make sure you drop in their courses, and then I'll know that this is something that you're looking for. Thank you so much, everyone. I know that it's been a difficult time for a lot of people across the board, but if anything, hopefully this will bring a little bit more clarity to your workplaces, especially in New Zealand. And that is it for me, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day, night, evening, morning, whatever it may be, and I will catch you in the next one, everyone.